There is a moment right before everything falls apart when a person can still feel the ground beneath their feet. Nora Bennett had that moment once. She was standing in a lawyer's office, wearing her father's favorite blue scarf when she heard the words that would end her old life. "You are not named in this will." That was the last sentence anyone expected her to hear. What happened after would take years to unfold, and by the end of it, the two men who threw her out would wish they had never underestimated her. Before we get into what happened to Nora, take a second to hit that subscribe button. Stories like this one are the reason this channel exists, and trust me, you do not want to miss how this one ends. Now let's go back to where it all began. Nora grew up in a large house on the edge of a quiet town, the kind of house people pointed at when they gave directions. Her father, Harold Bennett, had built a modest but respected trading business from nothing, the kind of thing that takes 40 years and thousands of small decisions to grow into something real. Nora was the youngest of 3 children, and from the time she could walk, she was the one who followed her father into the office instead of staying home to play. While her brothers, Elliot and Wesley, spent their afternoons chasing friends and easy fun, Nora sat quietly in the corner of her father's office, watching him work, asking questions no child her age should have known to ask. By the time she was a teenager, she was not just watching anymore, she was helping. She learned how to read a balance sheet before she learned how to drive. She understood contracts before she understood how to flirt. Harold used to joke that she had an old soul trapped in a young woman's body, and there was truth in that joke. While Elliot and Wesley grew into men who expected things to be handed to them, Nora grew into a woman who understood that nothing worth having comes without work. Elliot was the oldest, loud and confident in the way that convinces people he must know what he's talking about. He had a talent for making promises and an even greater talent for not keeping them. Wesley was the middle child, quieter than his brother but no less entitled. He had a habit of standing just behind Elliot, nodding along, letting his older brother take the lead so he could avoid the blame when things went wrong. Together, they made a pair that Harold trusted far more than he should have, simply because they were his sons, and somewhere in his heart he believed blood meant loyalty. Nora never resented her brothers for their carelessness, not at first. She loved her family the way people love the only family they have ever known, without condition, without calculation. She covered for their mistakes at the office more than once. She smoothed things over with clients when Elliot missed deadlines. She quietly fixed the numbers when Wesley made costly errors he did not understand. She did this not because she wanted credit, but because she believed in the deepest part of herself that the business was bigger than any one person's ego. It was her father's legacy, and by extension it was hers too, but there were small moments, quiet ones, that hinted at what was coming. Family dinners where Elliot would casually mention how the business would be his one day, as if Nora were simply a helpful employee rather than a Bennett herself. Meetings where Wesley would take credit for ideas that had come from her, and Harold, distracted or simply unwilling to referee his own children, let it slide more times than he should have. Nora noticed these things. She filed them away quietly, the way people do when they are not yet ready to face what those small moments actually mean. Then came the year everything changed. Harold's health began to decline, slowly at first, the kind of decline that hides itself in tiredness and small forgetfulness before it becomes something impossible to ignore. Nora took on more responsibility at the office, staying late, managing what her father no longer had the strength to manage himself. Elliot and Wesley, meanwhile, grew more confident that their inheritance was simply a matter of time. They began speaking about the business in the past tense, as though their father were already gone, as though the only question left was how they would divide what was coming to them. Harold passed away on a quiet morning in early spring. Nora was the one who found him. She was the one who called for help, who sat beside him until it was too late to matter, who carried the weight of that morning long after everyone else had moved on to practical matters like funeral arrangements and legal paperwork. Grief, for Nora, was not a performance. It was something she carried silently, the way she carried most things. 2 weeks after the funeral, the family gathered in the office of Douglas Whitfield, the lawyer who had handled Harold's affairs for over a decade. Nora sat between her brothers, still wearing black, still raw from a loss that had not yet finished settling into her bones. Douglas cleared his throat and began to read. The will named Elliot and Wesley as the sole inheritors of the business, the properties, and nearly everything their father had built. Nora's name appeared only once in a single line near the end, stating that she would receive a small, symbolic sum, an amount that felt less like an inheritance and more like an insult dressed up as generosity. For a moment, Nora simply sat there, waiting for someone to explain that a mistake had been made. She looked at her brothers, expecting to see confusion mirrored in their faces. Instead, she saw something far worse. She saw the faintest trace of satisfaction, quickly hidden but not quickly enough. It came out slowly, in pieces, the way betrayal often does. In the months before Harold's death, when his mind was no longer as sharp as it once was, Elliot and Wesley had convinced him to sign new documents, presenting them as simple updates to old paperwork. Harold, weakened and trusting his sons in a way he perhaps should not have, signed without fully understanding what he was giving away. Nora had been in the room for some of those visits, but she had been so focused on her father's health that she never thought to question the papers being placed in front of him. That single oversight would cost her everything. When she tried to speak up in the lawyer's office to ask how this could possibly reflect her father's true wishes, Elliot cut her off before she could finish. He accused her, in front of Douglas, of manipulating their father's finances for her own benefit during his final months, twisting the truth so completely that even Nora struggled to recognize the version of events he was describing. Wesley nodded along, adding details that were not true but sounded convincing enough to plant doubt. It was a performance, rehearsed and cold, designed to make Nora look like the villain in a story where she had only ever tried to help. Within a month, she was gone from the house she grew up in. Elliot changed the locks. Wesley boxed up her belongings and left them at the end of the driveway like garbage waiting for collection. The business she had helped run for years suddenly had no place for her either, her role quietly eliminated under the excuse of restructuring. She lost her home, her position, and the family she thought she understood, all within the span of a few devastating weeks. If you're finding this story hard to watch unfold, imagine how hard it was to live through. Drop a comment below and let us know where you think this story is headed, because what happens next is not what anyone expects. Nora spent the first few weeks in a state that could only be described as free fall. She stayed in a small motel on the edge of town, the kind of place with flickering lights and thin walls, because it was the only place she could afford without asking anyone for help. She had savings, but not much, most of her money over the years having gone quietly back into the family business in ways her brothers never noticed or acknowledged. She had spent so many years building something for her family that she had never built much of anything just for herself. The people she thought were friends mostly disappeared. It is a strange and painful truth that many friendships built around a certain version of your life do not survive when that life changes. Invitations stopped coming, calls went unanswered. The social circle that had once revolved comfortably around the Bennett name suddenly had no room for a Bennett who no longer had money or standing attached to it. Nora learned in those weeks exactly how conditional some relationships had always been. There was one person who did not disappear. Her name was Simone, a woman Nora had known since childhood, someone who had drifted in and out of her life over the years but who showed up now when it mattered most. Simone did not offer pity. She offered a couch to sleep on, a warm meal, and blunt honesty that Nora needed far more than sympathy. "You built that business with your bare hands," Simone told her one night. "Nobody can take what's in your head, only what's in your name." That sentence stayed with Nora longer than she expected it to. It sat with her through sleepless nights, through the humiliation of applying for jobs she was overqualified for, through the quiet moments where grief for her father and anger toward her brothers tangled together until she could barely tell them apart. Slowly, painfully, something began to shift inside her. The sadness did not disappear, but it started to make room for something else: determination. She remembered a conversation she'd had with her father years earlier, back when she was still young enough to believe the world was simple. He had told her that a business is not really the building or the bank account. It is the relationships, the trust, the knowledge of how things actually work behind the scenes. Nora realized she still had all of that. Her brothers had taken the name on the door, the properties, the bank accounts. But they had not taken what she carried inside her, the years of quiet expertise that no signature on a legal document could erase. She began small. She reached out to a handful of clients she had worked with personally over the years, people who trusted her judgment more than they trusted the family name attached to the business. She offered consulting work at rates far lower than she deserved, simply to get her foot back in the door. She worked out of Simone's kitchen table with a secondhand laptop, taking calls late into the night, rebuilding relationships one conversation at a time. It was slow, painfully slow. There were nights she cried from exhaustion, nights she wondered if she had made a mistake trying to compete with the very name her brothers still controlled. But something interesting began to happen. The clients she worked with noticed a difference. Nora did not just manage numbers. She understood people, understood risk, understood how to make a decision that protected a business for the long term rather than the short-term gain her brothers had always chased. Word began to spread, quietly at first, the way real reputations always do. Meanwhile, back in the world she had left behind, cracks were beginning to show in ways Elliot and Wesley did not yet fully understand. Without Nora's steady hand managing the details they had never bothered to learn themselves, the business began making mistakes. Contracts were mismanaged, deadlines were missed. Clients who had once trusted the Bennett name began quietly looking elsewhere for partners they could actually rely on. Elliot, ever confident, assumed these were simply bumps in the road, the natural cost of running things his own way. Wesley, less confident but equally unwilling to admit fault, followed his brother's lead, blaming bad luck, blaming the market, blaming anyone except themselves. Nora heard about these struggles secondhand, through old contacts who still checked in occasionally, careful not to take sides but unable to resist sharing news. She did not celebrate her brother's misfortune. If anything, some small, stubborn part of her still hoped they would figure things out, that some version of the family she remembered could still exist. But she no longer waited for that hope to come true. She kept building. A year passed. Then too, Nora's small consulting work grew into something larger, something with its own name, its own office, its own reputation built entirely on her own two hands. She specialized in helping struggling businesses find their footing again, a kind of work that felt deeply personal given everything she had lived through. She understood better than most people in her field what it felt like to lose everything and have to rebuild from nothing. That understanding made her exceptional at her job. Her business grew a reputation for honesty in an industry that did not always reward it. Clients trusted her because she never overpromised the way Elliot once had. She never hid behind excuses the way Wesley did. She told people the truth even when it was difficult, and more often than not, the truth was exactly what struggling businesses needed to hear. Slowly, without any grand announcement, Nora Bennett became a name people in the industry recognized and respected, not because of who her father had been, but because of who she had chosen to become. There is a particular kind of moment that feels almost too poetic to be real, and yet these moments do happen in life more often than people expect. It came in the form of a phone call. A struggling company reached out to Nora's firm, desperate for guidance after years of financial mismanagement. The company was deeply in debt, on the verge of losing its remaining contracts, searching for anyone who could help them restructure before it was too late. When Nora reviewed the paperwork sent over by her team, she recognized the company's name immediately. It was her father's business, the one Elliot and Wesley had taken from her, the one they had run into the ground. For a long moment, Nora simply sat with that information, feeling every emotion she had spent years learning to manage rise up at once. Anger, grief, a strange, aching kind of sadness for the business her father had spent his life building. And underneath all of it, something quieter and more complicated. A sense that the story was not finished yet, that this moment had been waiting for her long before she understood it was coming. She could have walked away, part of her wanted to, but another part of her, the part that had spent 2 years learning exactly what it meant to rebuild something from nothing, understood that this was not really about revenge. It was about finishing what she had started the day she left that motel room and decided she would not let her brother's betrayal define the rest of her life. She agreed to take the meeting. When Elliot and Wesley walked into the conference room expecting to meet with a consulting firm that could save what remained of their father's legacy, they did not expect to see Nora sitting at the head of the table. For a moment, nobody spoke. The silence stretched long enough to feel like its own kind of confession. Elliot's confident expression faltered first, the realization slowly spreading across his face. Wesley simply stared, unable to find words for what he was looking at. Nora did not raise her voice, she did not need to. She spoke calmly, the way she always had, laying out exactly how deeply the business had fallen, exactly how few options remained, exactly what it would take to save it, if saving it was even still possible. She watched her brothers, the men who had once stood in a lawyer's office and called her a liar to protect their own inheritance, now sitting across from her with nothing left to negotiate with except desperation. It would have been easy in that moment to make them beg. It would have been easy to walk away entirely, to let the business their father built collapse the same way they had let her collapse 3 years earlier. But Nora had spent a long time thinking about what kind of person she wanted to be on the other side of all this pain, and she had decided, somewhere along the way, that becoming her brothers was never going to be the victory she was looking for. Instead, she laid out terms. She would help restructure what remained of the business, but only under new leadership, her leadership, with Elliot and Wesley stepping back entirely from any decision-making role. She would honor her father's legacy, the parts of it worth honoring, but she would not pretend that the people who destroyed it deserved to keep steering it. It was not an act of cruelty. It was simply the truth laid out plainly, the same way she had always done business. Elliot tried to argue, old habits dying hard even in defeat. Wesley, quieter as always, seemed to understand faster than his brother that there was no room left to negotiate. In the end, they had no real choice. The alternative was losing everything completely, and even in their pride, they understood the difference between losing everything and losing control while keeping something. Word of what happened traveled quickly through the small, tightly connected world their family had once belonged to. People who had disappeared from Nora's life during her lowest moments suddenly remembered her name again, suddenly wanted to reconnect, suddenly admired what she had built. Nora did not need their admiration anymore. She had learned, in the years since her fall from that world, exactly whose opinion actually mattered, and it was rarely the people who only showed up once success returned. Douglas, the lawyer who had once read that devastating will aloud, reached out to her separately months later. During the process of reviewing old paperwork for the restructuring, discrepancies had surfaced, small inconsistencies in the original documents that raised real questions about how thoroughly Harold had understood what he signed in his final weekend months. It did not undo what had happened. It did not restore the years Nora had lost or the relationships that had crumbled along the way, but it offered something she had not expected to receive. A quiet, official acknowledgement that what had been done to her was not right, that her father's true wishes had likely been very different from what those documents claimed. Nora did not pursue further legal action. She had already built something far more valuable than a court victory. She had built a life entirely her own, one that no signature, no manipulated document, no betrayal could take away from her again. That, more than any ruling, felt like justice. Today, Nora's firm is known throughout the industry as one of the most trusted names for businesses trying to rebuild after failure. She often tells her own story to young employees starting out, not as a tale of revenge, but as a reminder that the things people try to take from you are rarely the things that actually matter. They can take a name off a door. They can take money out of an account. They can take a house, a title, a seat at a family table. What they cannot take is the knowledge in your mind, the strength you build through hardship, or the person you choose to become when everything else has been stripped away. As for Elliot and Wesley, they still work within the company in smaller roles now, far removed from the confident men who once stood in a lawyer's office believing the world owed them everything simply because of the family they were born into. They rarely speak about those early years, about the will, about the moment they watched their sister walk into a conference room and quietly take back everything they thought they had won. Some stories do not need loud confrontations or dramatic speeches to reach their ending. Sometimes, the quiet, steady rebuilding of a single person's life says everything that needs to be said. Nora never got a grand apology. She never received the kind of closure that makes for a perfectly tidy ending. What she got instead was something better, something more real. She got her life back, built entirely on her own terms, standing on a foundation no one could ever quietly take from her again. If this story moved you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe for more stories just like it. Stories about people who lost everything and found the strength to build something even greater. Let us know in the comments what part of Nora's journey stayed with you the most, and if you believe some inheritances are never written on paper at all. We'll see you in the next one.